So let's look at Jonah. We're going to be going through Jonah chapter 1, but let's look at the first 3 verses. And we did this last week, but I want to talk to you today about the question behind the question. See, there's questions we're focusing on, but guess what? They're not necessarily the wrong questions, but there are more important questions, and I call that the questions behind the questions that we need to get more deeply into. And so it says this, that one day the word of the Lord came to the prophet Jonah, Amittai's son. Man, they had some weird names back then, didn't they? Hello, Amittai. Get up and go to that powerful and notorious city of Nineveh. Call out my message against it, because the wickedness of its people has come to my attention. Now, it sounds like God's a little harsh. It sounds like he's an angry God. It sounds like he's a judgmental God. But, you thumb over to chapter 4, which we're not going to do right now, but you can do it later, and you see the heart of God. You see Jonah expressing the heart of God. You're going to see the heart of God as Jonah comes back to God in chapter 2. So we have a God that he is the God of truth, but he's the God of mercy, and he's the God of grace. The whole book of Jonah is this. God gave Jonah another chance. And he gave the people of Nineveh another chance, because he's the God of second chances. But notice this. In hearing those instructions, Jonah got up, ran toward Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to the port at Joppa, found a ship, and bound for Tarshish. He climbed on board, paid the fare, made himself comfortable in the hold of the ship. Now, give me a break. Do all those little details matter? That's like this. Imagine somebody gets up one morning and they decide to leave their family. They go to Oxmoor Mall and use their Macy's gift card. They then hop on Hurstbourne and drive down to Shelbyville Road, or they go down Shelbyville and then turn a right on Hurstbourne, where they proceed to drop into Blairwood to do a quick workout. They then hop on 64, drive to Lexington, where they head on to Florida. Do all those details really matter? The most important detail, the most important question is, why did they abandon their family? Why did they leave? It says that Jonah ran. You see, you can get so caught up in the speed of life that you get caught up in the trivial and you miss the spiritual. You get caught up when it's all said and done in the end. You get caught up in really the meaningless and you miss the meaningful. You get caught up in the smaller questions of life and you miss the bigger questions of life, like, why am I here? Why did God make me? How can I know true meaning and purpose? And how can I find his purpose for my life? How can I feed the relationships in my life that God wants me to feed? How can I know that person in my life? How can I know my kids? How can I know my significant other? How can I make sure, and here's a real big one, how can I make sure before I die that I take care of what God wants me to take care of? How can I make sure that I pay attention to what God wants me to pay attention to? He ran. He got on his car and jumped on 71. He drove like the Fast and the Furious, which is why his nickname is Faster Faster. He then dropped into Starbucks in the Highlands to get his favorite beverage of choice, a triple venti latte. But he had no time to connect with people because there were too many places to go to and too many things to take care of. Because the weight and the responsibility was great. His time with God began to be shortened because of all that he felt on his shoulders. He began to get in later and go to bed later because he couldn't come down from the adrenaline that was going through his system. He had, unbeknownst to him, found himself living in Tarshish. He had gotten caught up in really the trivial and missing the spiritual. He had gotten caught up in the meaningless and missing the meaningful. He had gotten caught up in trying to do it all on his own instead of trusting God to do it and inviting others in to help? Are you running? You know, we got things to take care of, don't we? Yeah, we got a lot of things to take care of. You got things to take care of? Yeah, we got laundry to take care of. At least Marcia does. Hey, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I do my own laundry, thank you. We got laundry to do. We got kids to attend to. Hey, I counted my kids, Luke and Hope, when they graduated. They're out of college now, but when they went to college, between college and getting out of college, they moved 13 times, and we helped them every time. Kind of get an amen? Yeah. Like I said, we got kids to attend to. We got a job to do. We got projects to get done. We got schoolwork to finish, right? And it's so easy in the midst of that to just get to run. And we miss the most important things of life that God wants us to be about. And we miss, really, the biggest thing is, what is God saying? And what is God wanting you to do about it? With that simple next step. You know, this past week I went to the cabin. I had to come home Thursday night because of the bad weather. But I sat out there on the porch, and it was really cool because the lake, the mist was up above, was hovering over the lake. It looked fascinating. And here's what happened. I just want to illustrate this thing about not getting so caught up and moving so fast that you miss what God is saying. So I was sitting out there on the porch because, Thursday it was like 60 degrees. So it was pretty cool. I was sitting out there with my hoodie on. I looked like a monk, And I'm sitting out there and I'm being quiet, and then I'm praying out loud as like short sentences. Like one thing, or two things. And then I'm pausing. But the temptation is to go and take care of what's in the back of my mind. And what's in the back of my mind is I want to work on Jonah. Because there's pressure. I mean, if you speak for a living, or if you do presentations for a living, or you've got deadlines to meet or projects to get done, you know what I'm talking about. You feel this, it's like a monster that demands to be fed. You've got to take care, you've got to step up, you've got to perform, you've got to get it done, right? And it's a joy, it's a privilege if you have found your niche in your life. Whether it's an engineer or insurance or sound engineering or sales or bookkeeping, or if you're a homemaker and you're investing in your kids, whatever it might be, you work in the school system, it's a joy to find your niche, and God has a niche for every one of you. If you're a police officer, like my brother George, we appreciate the police officers, and we appreciate him. And Nick Pedigo, too, he's another officer here in the church. God has a mission, and he wants to use you in the line of work that you're in to represent him and to be on mission in what you do. You still got stuff to do to get done for the job, but you see there's the question behind the question. There's the meaning behind the meaning. Because living your life as a grace-filled person to a person, maybe you do the sale, but guess what? They need a little grace today. Or maybe they say something, and you sense that it's an opportunity for you to share your God story of what God has done in your life. Hey, I know it's a little weird, it's a little off the subject, but I just felt, with what you just said about you and your wife are splitting up. Could I just share a little personal story with you? Because they just got personal. Is that not more meaningful than making the sale? Which is going to be more important in the end? And so I'm sitting out there, and every time I pray, I pause, but I'm feeling this voice saying, get in and start working. Get in and start reading through the book of Jonah. You got to get the outline done, man. You got to start, you got to get on board here. Do you ever feel that pressure in your life? Or maybe it's distractions. But every time I get through praying and pause, I'd feel something else I need to pray about. And I'd pause, and I'd keep feeling something else I need to pray about. And then finally I caught on. And so I said this, God, I won't leave until you tell me to leave. And I stayed in that posture maybe another, 30 minutes. I mean, it wasn't like forever. Don't miss your Nineveh. Last week, I asked you, what is your Nineveh? And what it was this, what is that place in your life God wants to give you a second chance? Because He's the God of second chances. You know, what's that place in your life? Maybe you've kind of given up on it, because you've had so many failures in trying to deal with it. It's kind of like, hey, I'm done. Or maybe you feel condemned, or you just feel hopeless, or maybe not hopeless, you just kind of been unattentive about it. But God's saying, I want to give you another chance. And so we had multiple people come down and write on cards and put them here at the foot of the cross. This is my second chance. This is what God wants me to join hands with Him on. And I want to say this, whatever that thing is in your life, whether it's going with Go Ministries to the Dominican to be an intern. Yeah, that's right. Austin, who does our espressos and lattes and cappuccinos, yeah, he's going to be going and interning. Whatever that second chance that you wrote down, whatever it is that you sense God speaking to you about, I can tell you right now, it's not trivial. It's deeply spiritual. I can tell you right now, it's not meaningless, it's meaningful. It's not small, it's the biggest thing you could give your life to. Don't miss your Nineveh. And let me tell you something, God will never stop fighting for your Nineveh. God will never stop fighting for that thing in your life that He is laying on your heart He wants you to be about. He wants you to conquer. He wants you to know. He wants you to take care of. Or He wants you to forget. Some of you need to forget. Your second chance is God wants you to quit beating yourself up black and blue. God wants you to stop your negative self-talk. God wants you to stop your victimization. He's saying it's at the foot of the cross. It's under my blood that I shed for you. You are forgiven. And I want you to let go. And you've been unable to do that, but He's the God of second chance. And He wants to help you to let go. And I want to tell you that He will never stop fighting for you. He will never stop fighting for you. So, I'm going to make some quick comments on these verses through chapter 1. You ready? Fasten your seatbelt. Not to be deterred, the Lord threw an intense wind at the sea because He wanted to get Jonah's attention, and He will never stop fighting for you. The violence of the storm put Jonah's ship in jeopardy of breaking apart, but the Lord was still with Jonah in his disobedience. You see, he had disobeyed God. I mean, it's just like with you. God has laid something on your heart He wants you to do, and you run from it. Even in your disobedience, God is still with you. Wherever you go, you take God with you. Psalm 139 that Chris was reading says this, just a quick read. It says, can I go anywhere apart from your spirit? Is there anywhere I can escape your watchful presence? If I go up into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in the realm of the dead, you're there. If I ride on the wings of the morning, if I make my home in the most isolated, notice this, if I make my home, it's almost like he's recalling Jonah. If I make my home in the most isolated part of the ocean, even then you'll be there to guide me. Your right hand will embrace me, for you are always there. Excuse me. You are always there. Verse 5, the sailors panicked, and they started running back and forth, throwing cargo overboard to lighten the boat. God cares so much for you that He will bring people in your life to help lighten your load if you will let them. Verse 6. Eventually a sailor found Jonah down in the hold of the ship where he had lain down and fallen into a deep slumber. He had laid down, fallen into a deep slumber. And they said this. When the captain heard, he went down and woke Jonah up. How can you sleep so deeply? Remember I said that God's the God of grace, but He's also the God of truth? How can you sleep so deeply? Get up, call out to your deity. Maybe your deity will see what is happening and save us from this catastrophe. God will bring people in your life, not only to lighten your load, God will bring people in your life sometimes to wake you up and to challenge you. And the sailors said to one another, you know what we should do? We should cast lots to find out who is ultimately responsible for our distress. And so they cast lots, and Jonah's name was found. For transformation to happen, there has to be personalization. For transformation to happen in your life, you have to personalize something. Here's what that means. You have to own your part in what happened. The moment you can own something in a relationship, that's where healing can begin. You know, this past week, Marcia was talking to me about something. And I'll just go ahead and tell you what it is. It's the weight and responsibility that I carry for the church. And I'm sure other pastors have had bigger things that they carry. Because I'm passionate about this church, and I'm passionate for you. But I will say that sometimes the building, although there's a guy that stepped up today and told me he wants to help with oversight of building and maintenance. And I find myself sometimes bringing that home, and that's all I talk about. And I know it's a boundary. It's just like with you, with your own work. You know, hey, you can check in and talk about work, but there's other things to talk about, right? See, it's not the people, but it's building stuff. And we've had, the past 2 weeks, it seemed like one thing after the other has been happening in the building. And so it's like I feel enmeshed. And she began to try to talk to me about that because I felt stressed about it, but she began to try to talk to me about that, like, can we talk about something else? You know, can we need a break? We need sanctuary. You know, it's not the people, it's the other stuff. And I got defensive because I was stressed and I felt like she wasn't being understanding. And we just kind of took a break. You know, we kind of took a timeout, like an adult timeout, right? Later on that day, as I began to think about it, I knew she was right. And so I sent her a text. And I think a text is okay to communicate with someone as long as you communicate in person later as a follow-up, which I was going to do. I simply texted her because I said, look, I want you to know that I know you're right. And I'm sorry that I was defensive. And I know that we need time just to ourselves. And I know that we need to protect that. I mean, she sent me the best message in the world, and we talked later, and everything was good. You see, the moment you can own something, if you're walking around all defensive, you know, it's not going to work. And so we need to own things, but the moment that we do, God can step in. After interrogating him, the sailors were terrified because Jonah had told them he was running away from the Lord's presence. And the sailors said to Jonah, "What have you done? Because of you, we're all going to be killed." The choices you make do affect the people in your life. But ultimately, God is still with you even in those choices. God is still with you in the midst of the storm, but ultimately He's trying to get you to quit being so defensive, right? He's trying to get you to quit running to face what He wants you to face, even if it's the darkness, so that He can bring the light, so that He can bring healing into your life. Is there something God wants you to face? Maybe it doesn't feel comfortable, but in acknowledging it, there's going to be healing. In acknowledging it, and you stop your running, and God can begin to put your life back together, and you begin to live for what is really important and what really matters. At that, they grabbed Jonah so Jonah shouts back. Verse 12. Jonah shouts back. Listen to this. God is using the sea to punish me. So pick me up, throw me into the sea, and then the sea will grow calm again and you'll be safe. This is all my fault. Any of you ever been there? This is all my fault. This great storm of my God's anger has built against you because of me. Even when you've given up on something, God has not given up on you. He's bigger than your failure. He's bigger than your disobedience. He's bigger than any place that you've been. He's bigger than anything that you've done that you think cannot be forgiven. He's bigger than your Nineveh. He's bigger than the weight that you're carrying on your shoulders. He said, come unto me, all you who labor and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm meek and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and the burden I give you to carry is light. We get living at a pace of life, focusing on the wrong questions, and the weight becomes too great. We follow His pace of life, sitting on the deck, looking at the mist, not stopping praying until He says it's time to go. And the yoke becomes easy and the burden becomes light. And He begins to work in amazing ways. I love what Teresa of Avila said. She was a nun in the 1500s. This is beautiful. She said, if you sometimes fall, do not lose heart or cease striving to make progress, because even out of your fall, God will bring good. And it's the truth. So at that, they grabbed Jonah by his arms and his legs, and they threw him overboard. And when they did, the raging sea grew calm. The sailors were even more terrified, but they offered sacrifices to God, and they made promises to Him. Is that amazing or what? God will even use your sin for someone else's salvation. God will even use your disobedience to be someone else's obedience. And so the Lord didn't let Jonah die. He chose a large fish to swallow Jonah, and that's the miracle of all this that we're going to look at next week, which is why I've entitled the sermon next week, Do You Need a Miracle? For 3 days and 3 nights, the prophet Jonah sat safely, everyone say safely, inside the belly of this fish. You know, I don't think Jonah wanted to die, but I think he felt he deserved to die. But God had other ideas. Because He's the God of second chance. Because He's the God who will never stop fighting for you. He's the God who will stay with you, who will go with you no matter where you go. Because that's how great His love is. No, He doesn't want you to stay there, but He will never stop loving you, and He will never give up on you. And so, in closing, I want to read this beautiful prayer that Jonah wrote. To his God, Jonah prayed from inside the great fish. With desperate cries, I beckoned the Lord to hear, and He answered me. From the belly, the place of death, I cried out to you, and you have responded to my voice. You threw me into the watery depths and cast me into the middle of the chaotic seas. The waters closed in around me. Your waves broke over me. Your surf swelled as I sank into the depths. But then I said to you, I have been driven out from before your very eyes, but still I know that I will gaze again upon your holy temple. The waters swallowed me. The deep abyss was covering over me. Seaweeds were wrapped around my head, trapping me as I sank to where the mountains are rooted to the earth. I went down to the place where death's gate will lock me in forever. Yet you lifted me up from the pit. Is there anybody in this room that needs to be lifted up out of the pit? Because he's the God who will do that. All you got to do is cry out to him. You lifted me up from the pit. Lord, you are my God. Only as my life was fading away did I remember the Lord. To your sacred dwelling, your holy temple, my cries did rise to you. Those who worship worthless idols turn their backs on God and renounce their loyal love. But I will sing to you, and I will sacrifice to you with a voice filled with thanksgiving. Whatever I promised, I will certainly pay it. Because deliverance is from the Lord alone. And then the Lord directed the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto the shore. Is there anything that you're running from in your life? I can tell you that coming back to the Lord's presence is a lot better than being in the belly of the fish. Coming back to the Lord's presence, to that thing he's calling you to do, calling you to be about, is a lot better than living in Tarshish. Is there some way today that God is saying, I want you to return to me? I want you to return to me. Because he's the God of second chance.